Would you please? Thank you, Murtaza. Now I'll pass it over to Adam Pez to officially kick us off. But first, let me take a moment to introduce Adam. Adam is a seasoned digital marketer, writer, and a strategist with over a decade of experience working with global B2B tech companies and mission-driven organizations. Adam has supported different companies in building powerful marketing strategies, and now he's joining us to share practical tools you can use to strengthen your own online presence and impact. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Miriam.
You're welcome.
So let me just share my screen. All right. So, welcome to you all. So this is the first time that I've delivered this presentation before, but it's based upon I'd say over a decade of my personal experience working with B2B tech brands, and reflects a lot of the experiences, the learning that I had to make as a content marketer. And many of the lessons that I wish I'd known 10 years ago when I just started out. So really for you guys, this is sort of your cheat sheet, your accelerated introduction to what makes social media really, really effective within a larger like content marketing operation. So by content marketing, I mean whereby companies go about deliberately creating content on their blog, on their YouTube, and on their different multimedia channels to engage an audience with the explicit objective of eventually turning them into customers. So that's really the mindset that I approach social media with. It's that it's a tool, it's a strategy, or it's a tool within a larger strategy, where you're trying to drive a set of specific, measurable results. Now, today in our session, we're going to be going through the sort of higher level strategic conceptualization of social media within an organization. So say you're working at a tech company, you're in a content marketing role or a marketing role, and you're being asked to produce social media for your company's channels. This will be very helpful to you in terms of understanding how you can produce content that's effective, that's going to engage people, that's going to resonate, and that's going to deliver specific, measurable results for your company that allow you to demonstrate your impact. But many of the lessons, principles, constructs, and frameworks that you're going to hear about today, this is really a crash course. It's like the 101 survey level. But many of those principles and ideas, they will actually be applicable to you personally as well, to your personal brand, for example, on LinkedIn. And if you want to use those platforms, for example, to network, or as a freelancer and a consultant, if you want to grow your own brand, drive referrals, and gain clients. So in terms of our roadmap today, we're going from basic strategy, the foundations of strategy, what teams really need to focus on at the outset, what they often neglect. We're talking about audience research. Down to choosing the channels and platforms with which to reach your audience, how social fits into the bigger sort of marketing, digital marketing or content marketing framework in terms of a sort of business function. Content creation, what makes good content these days? Good engaging content. Distribution, which is how we scale, remix that content. And then, of course, we just lightly touch on measurement and optimization at the end. So that's how do you communicate success? How do we conceptualize success at a higher level, not necessarily in terms of your social analytics and tracking likes and reshares and social amplification metrics, but more specifically on the broader sort of conceptualization. Something I don't have in this flow, but I'll be touching on is also how we align content with a brand as well. And that speaks to something called content themes, styles, and types. So that's the documentation, and that's the sort of the deliberate way you think about how you remix different types of content, how you speak to an audience using what sort of voice and style, and the types of content that you use when speaking to that audience. And that material I've packaged into a workbook, which I'll also be sharing during this presentation. And that provides what I can't in this slide share, the more sort of granular tips, frequently asked questions, and links to further resources that will allow you to expand your learning, and to troubleshoot some of these issues, like, for example, picking the right channels and platforms that you might encounter in a role, whether in a dedicated social media marketer role or a more generalist role that you might find yourself in at a startup, where you're being asked to do a lot of different things every day. And it can be very, very hard to take a more strategic as opposed to a reactive approach to the stuff you're putting on social media. And I've been in both positions, so I know what it's like. Okay. So yeah, as I covered, we're going to do a crash course on how companies, not all companies, not the top brands, but the intermediate companies, how they actually use social media. So we're going to be talking about how you structure, research, and plan social media. So what looks like spontaneity is actually, a deliberate strategy leading to a set of specific results. That's strategy. So what this workshop is not about, I just want to be clear, we're not going to be talking about the granular parts of campaign-specific reporting, ads, posting schedules and automation tools, analytics, paid media. That we're going to be focusing on strategy, frameworks, and the sort of core, I'd say, mindset you need to get into to be successful in a social media role within a marketing context. And for me, I'm speaking, of course, from a B2B, from a tech company. Companies selling software components, selling services to other companies. That's where I come from. Okay. So the first concept we need to talk about is audience research. This is something that's important. Who are we even talking to when we're doing social online? So, I mean, this is a really sticky concept for me personally. Starting out, I was working in a company, PDFtron, which was selling software components to developers. So for me, really, to write effective content for that audience, to engage them, I had to do a lot of research. I had to do a lot of stalking on forums like Stack Overflow, to really learn what they cared about, how they talked, and the sort of basic sort of etiquette they had when talking about products, solutions, on forums like Y Combinator, for example. So when as a foundation of your marketing or your social media, the first thing you need to ask is like, who are you actually trying to reach, and what do they care about? Typically, you'll be given your marketing literature, which will talk about the market. They'll talk about pain points. They'll talk about like practical problems that these people face and that your product solves, the total addressable market. But like audience research is distinct from that. You're talking about how your audience actually prefers to consume content online. So are they really engaged on LinkedIn? What do they tend to share on LinkedIn? What sort of formats do they prefer? For example, do they take templates? Do they take, scalable playbooks? Do they take other resources? How do they tend to talk to each other? Those are all the sorts of questions that you tend to ask when you start to do audience research, and they're distinct from, the personas that your team will typically have built, the marketing team internally. And really, you're trying to find that sweet spot where you can talk about issues, you can talk about concerns, you can talk about problems that are in the intersection between what you want to talk about, what your your CEO wants to talk about, which is your product, and what the audience wants to talk about, which is the problems, which is the issues, which is the gripes that they have. Working in my context, it would be a professional capacity as software developers or as marketers. Like audience research is like it's totally fundamental to all the stuff that you're going to end up doing as a social media marketer. But the problem is like it's really hard to find time for it on a weekly basis. So 41% of marketers, according to one survey, they say they don't do enough. Only 19% do it monthly, and those who do skip it often feel disconnected, really disconnected from their audience. And what happens is it ends up as you a lack of insight into what your audience cares about, a lack of clarity in your content. And so the content is just not very good, doesn't resonate. And as a team, you often find yourself screaming into the void, right? It leads to burnout. So just a second here. So within the workbook, sorry, guys. I'm going to share the workbook itself. There we go. So I know audience research, like as a concept, it can be kind of vague as to what that means exactly. So in the workbook, I've tried to break down more specifically, like the types of audience research that you'll use. And this is applicable, again, if you're in a more general marketing role, a content marketing role, or a social media marketer role. Like this is something you'll want to do. So I tried to be more deliberate in breaking down like the different types of audience research that you might do at different levels of sophistication in your organization. So if you're just starting out, if you're in a small, like tiny startup, if you're at a more established team, or if you're working at like a large company, a mature brand, like there's different levels of research and sophistication that you might end up doing. And the workbook provides a quick overview. So you can dive into that. I think though, like to keep things simple for you guys, you don't need to be like super sophisticated to do audience research effectively. It really just starts from the mindset. You don't need fancy tools. You need better questions. You need to really ask, like, some of the questions that I've posted in the workbook, like, what do they actually care about? Like, how is your audience actually consuming content online? You need to stalk them professionally. You need to start listening. You need to start following them. You need to follow their customers on platforms like LinkedIn. That's really the foundation. The tools, the other tactics, that comes later. But if you can like cultivate this mindset, that really is the foundation of everything. That's where it starts. But again, if you want like specific tactics and tools, you can go into the workbook, or you can just ask me personally. I'm happy to field any questions. Okay, so I mean, the next, like, beyond like understanding your audience, the next thing to keep in mind is the platform and message fit. So that's determining, like, assuming that these aren't simply assigned to you by the organization, like I'm working, you have a LinkedIn channel that you're inheriting, or you have a Twitter channel and a YouTube you're inheriting. If you're not, if you're working in a startup, if you're starting your own business, if you're working in a team with, sometimes there's companies that don't really even have a dedicated marketing department or a content team, right? You might be starting these things from scratch. Or you might have a content marketing process that is really like informal, and they only have one channel, their LinkedIn channel. Then you can start to think about, like, how do you actually go and find your audience, and what are the opportunities for you personally to start to drive business value. So, I mean, there's no real like hard and fast rules like limiting to you to like certain platforms. You really, like, you start with the platforms obviously that are popular with your target audience. So for me, for example, we're marketing to developers. That's going to be platforms like Stack Overflow. It's going to be Y Combinator. It's going to be Reddit. It's going to be Twitter as well. A lot of developers like to share information on hot takes on Twitter. So you're going to want to go where they are, and you're going to want to look at where your competitors are, and you want to join them on those channels. But you're also going to want to look more broadly and consider those, so less formal channels that your competitors may not be present, but your audience is present on, and that you want to reach. So you combine widely used platforms like LinkedIn and Facebook, which if you're trying to reach a professional audience, LinkedIn is kind of a no-brainer. But you also conceptualize ones that, think about ones that aren't utilized as much, and that's Reddit, for example. That's a big one. Of course, where you show up shapes what you say, and there's an etiquette to participating on forums like Reddit, for example. Each platform, obviously, it's its own thing. It has its own tone and culture and content formats and expectations, and also role in the buyer journey, which we'll get to shortly as well. Yeah. So in terms of thinking about social content and the buyer journey, and how, like, I would think about like social content strategically as somebody who works in a content marketing capacity where I'm producing a lot of different content, white papers, blogs, doing a lot of SEO, like social media within that framework becomes kind of a gap filler. It becomes another touch point in a buyer journey, which in a B2B context can be really, really complicated. So this is obviously Gartner. It's mapped out what the B2B buyer journey typically looks like. So for example, an organization looking to buy a supply chain management system. It involves a lot of different stakeholders across the organizations, the CEO, different directors, different department heads, all of them have a stake. All of them will have input into a decision, a top-down buying decision like that. At a SaaS company where you're selling software as a service to perhaps individual professionals, things are more streamlined, clearly. But the thing I want to take away here is social, I mean, and the content marketing process in general, it's complicated. It's not linear. Somebody's not going to visit a post and from there go and buy your product directly. It doesn't typically work like that. And certainly not in a B2B context where you're talking about a sales cycle that can be like 6 months long from that person becoming a lead to them finally signing the contract. So like social content, then like what you post, for example, in your LinkedIn feed, it's there to help teams discover you, to build brand awareness, to keep them aware of you, and to build trust with them over time. So if you can imagine that there's a buyer journey, like social content, it's not part of a funnel, as people often say, the content marketing funnel. It's actually more of a bridge where you're helping to build trust and engagement with that audience over time. And this also, like it's the same principle that applies to a business as it does to you individually as a professional who might be trying to build freelance clients online. You would post about, obviously, tips, your hot takes, your unique point of view. You'd be providing templates and other material on LinkedIn that you see influencers share all the time. And the purpose of this content over time is to build authority around a topic, to build collegiality with other professionals in your field, with clients who may be dealing with a particular problem, to show that you understand them, you understand where they're coming from and their point of view. And it works similarly for brands. The very good brands actually, and I'll show one in a moment, do something similar. So we'll move from strategy now to something a bit more concrete, and that is, well, what makes good content actually work on these platforms? Now, I can't speak to every platform. I have less experience on YouTube with video, for example. I have more experience on LinkedIn, Reddit, Y Combinator, just because that's where the audience is that I was speaking to, I was writing for, I was building content strategy for. That's where they lived. So for every like social media strategist, for every content marketer who works with social media as part of a strategy, it's going to be different. But like the key takeaway, and we're going to get into a concept, a framework called zero-click content here in a moment, is that the rules really have changed. Or I don't know if they've changed, but like platforms, they do not incentivize you to create content that gets people to leave. So if you share a link to your blog post on LinkedIn, the algorithm isn't going to reward that as much as a post that gets people to stop and engage with the content on the platform itself. And this speaks to both how the platforms, Facebook and LinkedIn, have designed their algorithms to keep you on their platform, and also to user habits as well. So audiences, they tend to scroll fast, they click less, especially on mobile, right? They're not going to want to leave a streamlined experience in LinkedIn to go and visit your website to read a long blog post. It just doesn't really work like that. So typically when you're developing social media, you want to deliver good value in the post itself, not just in the link. So that's where we talk about the concept of zero-click content. And this is something worth understanding or reading about. And that's about creating audience value on the platform where they are, not where you want them to be. I'm not sure if I've got anything in the... Yeah, so like some of the principles of like good zero-click content. Again, I would recommend go reading Amanda and the SparkToro blog. They go into it in depth, really, for how you can design good content that engages people with a good hook, with a good message, a good call to action, and the different sort of formats you can work with, really, to bring value on platform. Yeah. Okay, so the next concept that I want to touch on is really the question of distribution. So once you've researched the audience, you've selected your channels, which we'll get a bit more into in a distribution, like how do you actually select channels? Like, how do you ensure that when you post online, the content actually gets seen and heard? Because the worst feeling in the world is posting on LinkedIn and having absolutely nobody comment on it. Nobody, like, you get a few perfunctory thumbs ups from your team, from your boss, but beyond that, crickets. It's the worst feeling in the world, and I've been there. So when you post online, really, like, you have to think about the process of distribution, and that's being really strategic in how you share, promote, and amplify your content online across various channels, not just one channel, but various channels to reach and engage your audience. So a good piece of content, like a good blog, a good article, a good post, a good theme really deserves a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, because you have to keep in mind that most people will not see that post. It simply, they don't have time. They're not online at the right time, and it gets buried in their feed. So posting the same content a few times across a couple different time zones with new angles, new hooks, is actually entirely acceptable. It's not spamming. It's making sure that content gets seen. And it's the same principle that holds true with advertising. Is we as a team, we're used to our content we're produced. We've done it 1,000 times, and so we feel like our audience must have seen it. They must have engaged, but that's actually not true. People are not typically paying that close attention to what you're doing, which can also be really liberating as well once you realize that nobody actually sees all the flaws per se in your content too. So it gives you room to experiment and to repost.
Sorry to interrupt you, Adam. I just wanted to mention that we have a question in the chat, and I just wanted to ask whether we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, or you'll take questions as you go.
I was thinking we could do a Q&A at the end.
Sounds perfect.
But if they feel like something's not clear, and they have a pressing question they want to ask now, I'm happy to do it now, fine, as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So again, going back to the workbook, like when you think about distribution, like distribution is more of a content marketing concept, when you're thinking about the broader way in which you create content on your blog, you create content for your own channels, so to speak, and then how you remix and share that content onto different platforms for different audiences that may require angling it differently to meet the sort of etiquette and culture and tone that's expected by that audience on that channel. But like the point of distribution really is to just to make sure that your audience sees the content. And it's also about like testing, iterating on that as well. So it's about through distributing, through sharing, you're also testing for traction. And Ross Simmons is sort of the guru, the influencer who has written a lot in this space about like sort of distribution and finding that sort of content channel and audience fit, because that's really what's going to determine your success long term. And if you like read his content, read his book, he provides you sort of like a choose your own adventure framework that will take you from like basic principles to actually understanding like how do you actually tailor and test content on different platforms. I don't want to get into the granularity of that simply because it tends to be different for different teams, right? And different audiences. But if you want sort of somebody to handhold you through that process of defining who you're talking to, where, what channels to reach them on, and how to remix different sorts of content, that he provides a really, really like solid starting place. Yeah, there's something else that I wanted to touch on actually that's not in the SlideShare presentation, but I've included it into the workbook itself. Like when you're producing content, it's really good to document your processes, and to be really deliberate about like the types of content you're creating, the style that you're using for that content, and the audience that you're talking to. And it's important. Not only does it make your life easier, it allows you to really align with how your leader, for example, your brand and communications director wants that content to be styled, the voice it speaks in, the branding of that content. Typically, like we call this a content theme, which is like a larger concept that you're talking about, which I'll be more specific about in a minute. But like an example I like to use is Gong, Gong.io. And what they do on their LinkedIn channel. And they have a very sort of deliberate approach to their content strategy that's really, really well aligned with their audience, which is, of course, sales professionals, right? Who use their platform for intelligence on their deals and to record calls and so on. So when we're talking about themes, that's something as broad as like sales strategy or personal, professional pain points or gripes we have or problems we face as professionals. And then that theme will have like a style. It's confident, candid, conversational. You can get into specific examples. And then for every theme and style, you'll have types, right? You'll have text posts, employee quotes, personal testimonial videos, office peps, memes, the types of content. So with Gong, they do a lot of memes. They do a lot of interviews with professionals. It's worth really going through the platform and just seeing what they do. So like what you could take away from Gong and that platform, and I would advise you just to go and and check it out personally, is you'll see that they're not doing one thing on social media. They have a couple different objectives. They use it as a recruit platform on LinkedIn, for example. So you can see that kind of mixture, that content mix on the platform. But they provide value right on the platform. It's not just always a link out to a webinar or a post. They do have some of that mixed in, maybe 20% of the content, but 80% of it is about providing value right there for the audience, engaging them, speaking to their personal, pains and suffering as professional sales professionals, the challenges they face, really embracing their point of view to build brand familiarity with that audience. And it feels native, right? It feels natural to LinkedIn. It doesn't feel like it's repurposed or shoehorned into the platform. So yeah, like learning about like content themes, styles and formats, and then documenting like the tactics you use, the style you're using, aligned with, your brand literature. That's really, really important. And unfortunately, like along with audience research, this is something else that teams will typically neglect, either because they're too busy, they have informal process, immature processes. Like it's really important to be very deliberate and about what you're sharing, because later on that's going to be integral to your ability to improve. If you're not documenting it, if you're not capturing what you're doing, then you have no real way of measuring and benchmarking your performance. Sorry. So that brings us to like actually like measurement, proving the impact of what you're doing on social like on social platforms. Um, I think like obviously there's the analytics that the platform provides. There's analytics that you can get from a service provider like HubSpot or Hootsuite, that show you the clicks and the reshares and then your amplification rates and all these metrics that around how your network is growing, the amount of traffic you're getting. And that's all important. At the end of the day, numbers are sort of your first line of defense as a professional, especially in an organization where your director of marketing or maybe your leader doesn't really understand the value of social. It's important to have those numbers at your fingertips. But it's important also to communicate and to be clear that just given the way that the buyer journey works and the way platforms work and the way that people share, that a lot of the activity, the value that you're creating isn't necessarily going to be captured in those numbers. And that's the problem of what somebody like Rand Fishkin writes about. It's called dark social. So I've got a few examples here. Somebody shares your post on a Slack channel. You're tagged or mentioned in a direct message or a private thread somewhere else off platform, or somebody reads your content on social media, they read a case study, they're really impressed by it, and then they convert 90 days later. I mean, there's no way really to track all of these things. So in communicating your value to stakeholders, it's something that's really challenging, I think, in general. But when you do get these moments where maybe you're picked up on a podcast or you get a comment from a prospect on how they loved your content or how it was really helpful, that you do share it on Slack. There's something that your director of digital marketing can do, and that's like progress in terms of branded search lift or email signups after social pushes. So if I think close collaboration with your sort of direct report and your digital marketing team, you can develop the analytics that will give you more visibility into the impact that you're making. Uh, but again, I mean, like at the end of the day, like this is another one of these mindsets that I'm talking about. Like when you're talking about social media, it's really, you really have to investigate like what may be working on the platform, what's leading to more shares, what's leading to more conversations on your posts. Um, that's not really visible, and a lot of that will come from simple curiosity, listening, stalking your audience, being really curious, reading broadly, and that will allow you to provide the why behind some of the numbers, and also to help you to fill in the gaps where the numbers aren't really going to provide the evidence you need to prove the sort of impact of your work. So like to summarize this all, like to really be effective on social media, it's really about like aligning content with your audience needs and business goals. And there you get into a broader like understanding of like content marketing and how different channels and different types of content relate to one another, either as complementary or as bridges within a deliberate funnel of consistent engagement and progression. For example, if you're a professional on LinkedIn, you might use your LinkedIn comments and posts to build credibility and awareness about a topic, to build authority on a topic, and then you would drive somebody to sign up for your email newsletter. And then from your email newsletter, you give them deeper insights that they can't get anywhere else. And you direct them either to your Substack, to your personal blog, and then you direct them from there to register for your course or to buy your book. And then perhaps they become one of your clients where you're providing marketing services directly to them, solving many of the pains and problems that you spoke about. That would be actually like a content marketing funnel. And social media fits into that as a trust builder, an awareness raiser at the start, and providing additional touch points throughout the entire funnel or engagement ladder. The second principle is, of course, to choose your channels strategically, where your audience is, where your competitors are, and in less formal channels where your audience isn't, and to be very like aware of what the etiquette is for each platform and how people post and talk about problems and talk about their products. In Reddit, for example, you want to be very careful about what you say. Or in Y Combinator, again, you want to be very careful when you introduce your product. There's an etiquette for doing it. You want to understand zero-click content, so you want to know how the different platforms and algorithms reward content, and you want to know like what actually creates like very engaging, valuable on-platform native content for that audience, the sorts of types of content you use, the formats, the styles that speaks to that audience on that platform, and creates value for them where they are. And just in general, like, again, like prioritize consistency over perfection. I like the goal is just start like posting, and start learning, researching, following, and documenting your processes, the types of content you produce, the themes you're producing, the mixture of different types of content you're producing, and then what types of posts are resonating, what types of posts are generating engagement, are generating conversations, what posts are people commenting on, what are they saying? And over time, you can build a successful social media strategy that complements a broader content marketing engine that will drive value for your business, that you'll be able to show and demonstrate the lift that it's providing. Really, that's it. I think that takes us through everything. But again, like I've shared the link to the workbook, which provides real practical examples and like the more granular tips in terms of how you solve particular challenges, like where do you go for intelligence on your audience? How do you choose a framework or a channel? And also like where you can go to keep learning after today. So I mentioned a couple names, Ross Simmons, Amanda Natividad, don't know how to pronounce her last name, Rand Fishkin. Two other ones that are really good to follow are Anne Handley, the author of Everybody Writes, and Diana Rousseau. The last one particularly because she's really, really good at LinkedIn and building her personal brand on LinkedIn, and she's got a very methodical framework. So if you're interested in building your own brand, you're building your own freelance business or consultancy, that's where you would go. But yeah, there's many other different resources there for you to start learning more about. If you want to pursue a career as just a marketer, as a content marketer, or even as a social media manager, although that tends to be much more specialized. And that's it. Questions?
Hi, Adam. Thank you very much for this presentation. I I have a couple of questions, but first we have question in the chat from Deepti. Deepti is asking, how can we utilize this information for YouTube channel? I think she asked this question in the beginning when you were talking about LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said before, like a lot of my experience is on LinkedIn. YouTube is a bit of a different beast in terms of how you think of it. Like what YouTube is really, really good for is providing like evergreen and deep sort of content where you're providing in-depth explainers or product walkthroughs. For my company and when I was working at PDFtron selling to developers, it was actually a place where our product managers would host their reviews of different software libraries, and they would build a like personal connection and following with their audience. So it's really it's a place where you can provide more depth in terms of the sorts of content you can do. You can do influencer marketing where you can either cultivate those internally, where you have internal personalities. Like for us, it was really our head of product, Andre, who was really, really charismatic, done YouTube before. He almost hosted his own YouTube channel, talking about developing document solutions with different, open source and commercial libraries. Or you can reach out and you can contact other influencers, right, and get them to talk about your product or problem for you. That's not something I have like in-depth experiences, but like YouTube is useful for creating longer form content and guides and instructionals. And then you can actually take your YouTube content, and this is called redistribution or a divisible content strategy, which I actually link to in the resources. And you can take that and you can segment into clips that you can then host on other channels like LinkedIn, right? And just give them snapshots of that content, the facts, the highlights that you can then get them to engage with by linking out to your YouTube. But again, like that would be like again, Katie French, or even Ross Simmons. We'll talk about like this is like redistribution, remixing. So if you're interested in using YouTube and understanding YouTube and how it can fit into a process, well then yeah, I would start reading up on some of these resources that I shared, because I mean the great thing about Ross Simmons, for example, is he goes across so many different platforms for you, and within his book, which you don't necessarily have to buy. If you want to learn more, I could get screenshots for you, whatever, but he will allow you to do a kind of choose your own adventure, journey through the different platforms, and what role they can play in engaging an audience. But like I said, YouTube is really good for building a personal brand, a personal following, where you're providing more in-depth, sort of like explainers, um, um, and where you're providing that like sort of personal point of view and perspective and building like a rapport with people. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And okay, great. So Dipti says yes. Thank you, Dipti. And I see Sharif and Murtaza have their hands up. I think Sharif was first.
Hello, Adam. Thank you again. I have two questions, Joey. Question one is, can I shoot you a connection request on LinkedIn? And question number two is, what I realized, this is both for my volunteer work and things that I do on like freelance on my own, like photography side of things. There's a lot of things you can do. How do you be efficient with your time though? Like the things you've gone through here itself, like there's a lot of market research you can do. And when it comes to posts, the content you create and everything, you can spend a week creating that one post if you wanted to. But in terms of results, it could be a really good post. You're doing all the current trends right now. You know this is gonna be a hit. Um, uh, how do you be efficient with your time? Like, how do you not, spend a month on one project, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like speaking as somebody who's entered into like the whole like content marketing world from a long form investigative journalist writer, like my own personal like tendency is to go deep, deep, deep into things, right? So if I was left to my own like bad habits and personal preferences, I would be exploring like the trade-offs and components of specific software libraries for like a month, right? Um, and I would just be doing research and more research and more research into a topic. So, I mean, like to answer your question, like I think it's really it's a question of prioritization. Um, so at the end of the day, like it's about like really discussing with your team, with your leader, like and getting the data to back this as well. Like what sorts of like content are really going to drive engagement with your audience. And like as a content marketer, that means like consulting on like and prioritizing and being very deliberate in prioritizing using frameworks, the sort of content you need to produce, the urgency and relevance of that content. And there's all sorts of project management frameworks like Pi and so on and so forth that you can start to use. That helps. That provides a bit of structure. In terms of social media, like I think like you're right. Like perfection is the enemy of good, and your objective is to produce, short, sweet, and concise content. And not to focus for hours on a single post. And to be okay with imperfection, because the more you do it over time, you will get better, you will get faster at it, and that's okay. And if you do content that's mediocre, like obviously, I mean, you don't be sloppy in your work, but your audience isn't necessarily really going to notice, particularly when it comes to your personal brand. You're not managing a very large brand. There's less at stake. It's okay to take some risks. It's okay to fail a bit, and then you can learn. Particularly for someone like you who's starting out. but like in terms of like being efficient with your time, that's actually where distribution and remixing comes into play. Because there can be a lot of work, but once you understand that you're really just taking the same idea, the same core asset, that ebook you wrote, that webinar you wrote, and you're remixing it for your audience, turning it into a YouTube segment, turning it into a LinkedIn post, you know, turning it into a template or a scalable playbook, it becomes a lot easier to manage your time and work efficiently because you're working on effectively the same thing, right? And you're just developing it and distributing it over different channels. So that becomes a way of just making sure that, you know, you're not doing the same mistake I would do when I was producing content early in my career, where I would treat every blog post as its own unique, you know, piece of art that I had to perfect, right? And then spending weeks and weeks, like a week into each piece of content. But if you start to see things as a like a divisible content strategy where you're remixing, then you can become much more efficient and produce much more volume. And once you start to produce volume, you actually get the sort of the sample size you need to start using analytics and making meaningful conclusions about what is actually working with your audience or not. I hope that helps.
Cool. Thank you. Oh, and the LinkedIn one.
Yeah, yes. At the end, I will share my LinkedIn.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go next and ask my question because we are running out of time. Adam, thank you for your presentation. I have one question, maybe also it is the questions of others. So how often should we post on social media? As we know that there are different lifespan or actually have time for social media. So is that going to be should be a routine that weekly, bi-weekly, or we have to wait for example, for Facebook, after 5 days, we have to post or repost the content, or for LinkedIn, each 11 weeks, we have to do that, or we should have to get in another strategy for keep the momentum of the marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to give you like a very direct and simple question or answer to that question. You should post 2 times a week on LinkedIn, for example. I don't think there's any like hard and fast rule. I think to keep momentum with an audience on a platform like YouTube or LinkedIn, you do have to meet a certain velocity of content. You have to be consistent. But consistency can mean different things. And on YouTube, I follow channels where they only post maybe once every month, but it's very high quality. On LinkedIn, like if you talk to somebody like Diana Russo, like they'll say like consistency is key, and the minimum you should be doing is 2 posts a week. If you're like a personal professional trying to build a brand, 2 posts is sort of the floor. But oftentimes you'll see these people posting like every day. So there's no hard and fast rule, but you would want to post consistently, and you would want to make sure that what you're posting isn't redundant. You want the right content mix, the right variation, like somebody like, for example, a channel like Gong uses, or a professional like Ann Handley or Diana Russo uses, in terms of personal experiences, hot takes, tips, and templates, to not bore your audience to death, right? To not make it feel like you're hammering on a drum. But if you go and you look at somebody like Simmons or Russo, you'll notice that a lot of the content is actually just quick posts or fillers, like a quick poll on how you feel about something in your industry. So yeah, again, there's no hard and fast rule about how often, but you do need to think about what you're posting, you do need to be consistent. And yes, momentum is important. And the algorithms, particularly on platforms like YouTube, will penalize you if you do not, if you are not consistent. And it can be a real treadmill on certain platforms, like YouTube is a big one. It's just kind of notorious for that. If you want to keep your visibility, if you're really interested in building your followers and growth, then it becomes a beast, really, to maintain. Whereas platforms like LinkedIn, they're more relaxed around that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my questions because I don't see any other questions in the chat. And I just wanted to say that we have more time to take more questions. If people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask your questions. So Adam, as you know, we have different programs and projects we are working on. And from time to time, we have some campaigns to promote our members and also introduce our facilitators or basically mentors. So we are doing different projects and have different campaigns. So the first question I have is very similar to what Sharif and Mortaza asked. It is basically how frequently we should be posting to be consistent and not overwhelming our audience, which you answered. But I am also wondering that given that we serve multiple target groups in different ways, we have clients basically who are looking to outsource some of their work, and then we are trying to connect our members to those clients. We have we are targeting our funders, and also we have members or future members who are going to join us and learn more about Expertise Hub and what we can do and how we can serve them. So considering that we have these different kinds of target audience, do you think it is more efficient to focus on a specific campaigns at a certain time, or we should be posting contents related to all these different projects, initiatives, and target audience on a regular basis? So just to put it in context, should we focus 1 month on introduction campaign about our members, and the next month on the projects we are working on, or we should be posting regularly on a, for example, weekly basis on all of these basically different initiatives or campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I touched on this in distribution, is that your audience isn't present on LinkedIn on a platform all the time. And content gets buried within the feed after, in some cases, within hours. So it's something I would want to think about a little bit more. Like, obviously, like different audiences, different stakeholders, funders, for example, are going to engage with platforms differently. So the mixture of content you produce on a platform should reflect the audience, the stakeholder, the ideal customer profile, as we put it in marketing jargon, that you expect to engage on that platform. So my answer would be, it would be determining like who you want to reach, where that person hangs out, and then develop a mixture and a cadence that is appropriate to that audience on that platform, and to do them simultaneously. right? To not limit yourself to say, we're going to do this month, we're going to do this. No, the consistency is key. So you need to be consistent wherever you are, but you need to be strategic, right? You need to be focused in how you use that platform and who you're talking to about what types of topics. And again, it's not black or white. You don't have to speak to one audience, one set of concerns on one platform. For example, if you look at Gong, they do recruitment through LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, you'll see a mix of different content, but that mix reflects the audiences they expect to find and engage with on that particular platform. And they are very consistent, right? They do it on almost like a weekly cadence where you see the mix, right? Not a monthly, a weekly, like, yeah, I hope that helps. It's not a simple question. Like a content
Yes,
strategy is
absolutely.
something that takes months or years to grow, to understand, but certainly, I think you'd want to start with like really asking your like, who are we trying to talk to here? Who are we trying to reach? And how do they want to be reached? How do they want to be talked to? What do they actually want to read? What would they find interesting? So not like like the CEO wants you to talk about your product. The head of product at a company wants you to talk about your product, but what is it that they actually want to consume? Those are two different questions. And it's
Right. So from what I understand, these answers are very context dependent, but consistency is the key from what I get from uh, what you said. So it is important to be consistent, to be
yes.
efficient, right? We have a question in the chat, and then Sharif has their hand up. So Sean is asking, do you have any advice and insight specifically for startups? And I really think this is a good question because some startups don't have specific like departments focusing on marketing, and they are managing things at the same time themselves. So they have very limited capacity.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question actually. And like if you're going to face some of these pathologies with your content marketing, like working in a really informal and fast and fluid environment like a startup, that's where you're going to really face them. I mean, like in terms of a startup, like I think many of the same principles apply. Um, but you need to be focused and decisive in where you choose to spend your time and spend your energy. So typically I would say like focus on like one or two platforms or mediums. Like if you've got a startup and you want to engage an audience, just determine where that audience is, what platform they use the most, and just focus all your energy or much of your energy onto developing that one platform, developing a presence on that one platform. And then over time, as you grow, as you scale, as you develop more of an audience, then you can consider about branching out. But I'd really like figure out like, where are these people? Where can we meet them? And many of the same principles apply that say you were a individual freelancer, where you might have a YouTube channel, you might have a LinkedIn presence, but you really you limit yourself to one or two contexts as a way of focusing your time and focusing your energy. Within the workbook, like I actually took this into consideration, like organizations at different scales of maturity are going to use different tools and different methods to learn more about their audience. And there's actually like a specific section in there on sort of really scrappy methods you can start to use to learn about your audience, to choose your channels, to really to get started, to get the ball rolling without exhausting yourself. And again, like what's important to keep in mind as a startup is that you don't need to know everything on day one. You don't need to be perfect on day one. This is a process. And really it's about just being open-minded, being humble, and being willing to learn and being really, really curious about your audience, following them, professionally stalking them, following their customers, reading about them, reading about what they post. And then over time, this will pay dividends for you.
Thank you. Sharif, you have your hand up.
Hello again. So my question is, it's an odd one. So when it comes to certain job listings and I find entry-level marketing positions, I'll be going through the description of like, hey, XYZ, XYZ, XYZ. But sometimes I'm just like, I haven't done that before. And I know I can do it, I can pick it up quickly. But like, how do you approach as someone who's just getting into it? Like, how do you approach like, because I know oftentimes it's an entry level role, but the company putting the ad listing together, they're just gonna put in everything, hoping to find that unicorn who's like fresh out of school and ticks all the boxes. But at the same time, I also want to be like certain that if I do make it to the interview, I can also blow them away and like tick off all the boxes, give all the examples for all the different descriptions they put in there. But how do I approach that? I think imposter syndrome, this is getting to territory of imposter syndrome, but how do you, if you were to go back in time, you just graduated, what advice would you have?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, that's a good question. So I mean, like for me, going back in time, obviously it depends on the roles that you're applying for. For me, it was content marketing roles, and I was lucky in that sense, in that I had built up a portfolio of content that I produced as a journalist, for example. And I had some credentials that maybe other people didn't have. Like I had a master's degree, and that all really like helped me in terms of getting my foot in the door in an interview. Um, like, and that's like really like I think this is what a lot of hiring managers want to see, and this is really the challenge you face as a new hire, is that hiring managers, they're so risk averse, right? They don't want to hire anyone except that person who has literally done the job before, who they've had in that role for 6 months practically, right? They want to hire the person who has already been doing the job. So for you, really the challenge is like, how do you demonstrate that practical hands-on competency with the very skills and sort of things that they're looking for? So I mean, if you're looking at it, like for you as a writer or a social media manager, if those are the areas you're looking to do more in, like you want like a robust portfolio. That like really that's your first line of defense in an interview, that you can show them, look, I've done this before in a professional capacity. Here's the work I've produced. And ideally, here are some testimonials for people I've worked with as well. Like building that proof, building that corpus is really what's going to differentiate you from other candidates who are coming in fresh. And so that means looking at ways in which you can volunteer, work in a freelance capacity, and start to build up, again, that portfolio of work that you can show to people. And there's different platforms. Like for me, actually, like when I started out as a writer, and I'm not necessarily recommending this today, but it's something you can look at. I started on Upwork, actually, working gigs on Upwork. And on Upwork, I was discovered, and I started working for agencies, like marketing agencies. And then I went from sort of like just like a gig writer to a contract writer, and then I graduated to full-time employment, right? But I escalated from small jobs, small tasks, right, to small contracts to full-time work, right? So I didn't go straight at the full-time work, particularly in a field like marketing, particularly in B2B tech. It was extremely, extremely competitive. It's globalized too. So you're competing against people from around the world, and they really want to see people with experience. So my advice with you is don't deny yourself anything, still apply for those jobs. But really like study like what are the essential criteria and experiences they're looking for, and how you can develop proof by building your portfolio, by building those experiences, starting small, even with gigs, and working your way up through contracts to the full-time positions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I also had a question, if you don't mind, Adam. So during your presentation, you talked about the audience research and like how marketers don't do enough research. So I wanted to ask, what are some like simple low-cost ways, like small organizations that don't have a big budget for marketing, like nonprofits or like even uh, new entrepreneurs, like they could do this part, considering the financial limitation that they have. And
Yeah, I mean, like there, as I said in the presentation, there's all sorts of fancy tools out there, from like really high-end corporate social listing tools like Meltwater to like keyword research tools that everybody uses like SEMrush and Ahrefs, and obviously other platforms as well. And some of these platforms you can try using. They offer free credits, so you have a limited sort of entry-level access to it. But like for me, as a content marketer and working at like in previous roles, like really like where I found a lot of my most useful insights, like the real sort of juicy stuff that you could use to come up with a blog post idea, to tailor your content on these platforms, was literally by stalking people on professionally on these platforms, by following them on LinkedIn, by following their customers on LinkedIn. For developers, a lot of what I did was just like read through forums like Y Combinator, Reddit, Stack Overflow, going into GitHub repositories for things like PDF.js. So these software libraries, these open source libraries people use to develop, their solutions and embed like PDF viewing into their online software application, and just reading what developers were saying, about the software, the problems they had with the library, and then you can pivot that into content ideas. So you don't need to spend tons of money on all these different tools. You just need to be curious. You need to find your audience and you need to follow them. And SparkToro is another platform. It can help you discover audiences and audience platforms. But again, follow them on LinkedIn, use LinkedIn search, use hashtags on LinkedIn, and that will allow you to do very basic audience research. Again, it's not fancy. It's not something that's really fancy. It's just committing the time to actually follow the people that you care about online, right? To read what they're posting. And then all the different tools that allow you to get, advanced analytics and intelligence and data on what they're doing, like that's all well and good. And at some point you may do that within an organization, but like study the fundamentals first. And that's really just showing up, being present, commenting, engaging with these people, asking them questions personally. Like as part of my work, I did like 30 different interviews, right, with people. So talking to them personally, talking to them online, and following them and stalking them. Like, and if you can do all that, and just be consistent, like you don't have to exhaust yourself every week, but if you're doing it every month regularly, having like 1 or 2 customer interviews, for example, in my case, within the space of a year, you're going to learn a lot. Like you're going to learn a lot. Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? I don't see any other questions in the chat. If we don't have any questions, Mortaza, could you please share your screen with the QR code? We have an evaluation survey. It's just, I think it takes 2 minutes. We would really appreciate everyone's feedback on this session. So just please have it up on the screen for a few minutes, Mortaza, so people can scan it and complete the survey.
Now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Somebody's asking for you to drop the link, I think, into the comments.
I just put the link in the chat, so if you click on it, it will take you there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and again, like if any of you have questions, if you want to just chat personally about, challenges you may be facing, even just personally, professionally, Sharif said, getting a job and what you need to impress a recruiting manager, just drop me a line on LinkedIn, like a quick direct message. I left my own profile link within the comments. So yeah, just feel free to connect with me anytime online. If you want to chat about, like, again, content strategy, social media marketing, or just how you can develop your profile and score a job, your first job in content marketing, which I know is very can be challenging, especially with today's compressed environment where a lot of the big tech companies are laying off people. Just drop me a line anytime.
Absolutely. I'll see a comment in the chat. We'll make sure to share the recordings with you. So if there is no further question, I would like to thank everyone for their time. We really appreciate you joining us today. And please feel free to email me with any question. And I will share our future workshops with you. And thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you,
great
everyone.